Good evening, good afternoon, everyone. Please sit down. Relax. Let's talk a little bit front-end today. Yes, a front-end topic on DevOps. Woohoo! Anyone here doing some front-end these days? Oh, nice. Okay, nice. Well, today I'm going to talk about CSS. And have you written some CSS lately? Yes. Or have you perhaps written an abstraction of CSS, like Tailwind? Okay, you know the drill. Put your hands up in the beginning. Okay. For those who've written CSS and their abstraction, would you consider yourself an expert in the abstraction, or would you consider yourself an expert in CSS itself? You'll find out why I ask these questions in the next 30 minutes. As front-end developers, it's our duty to build beautiful UIs and create the most user-friendly experiences possible within the given constraints. Time constraints by our team members in operations, or technical limitations by perhaps having to work on a legacy code base. And with the concept of abstractions, we try to make complexity more manageable within those constraints, and that's the case for all programming languages. Abstractions are a great way to tailor code to the most common usage. One could create or generate a RESTful API client because who wants to write lengthy fetch requests day in, day out, or requests classes, whatever you do in Java. But due to the constant stress of having those constraints, our community, the front-end community, often takes a popular opinion for truth, and we eventually forget what's under the hood. And that's more and more the case with CSS these days. Because to some, CSS is the most beautiful language they have ever written, like a gentle stream flowing over your markup and letting it burst into invigorating life. But to others, CSS is like an insidious game of whack-a-mole, where changing one thing on the one side of your project eventually leads up to some unwanted side effect on the other side of your project. I didn't want to do that. My name is Maarten. You can find me on the interwebs under mrtnvh.com. And I am a lead front-end engineer at I/O in Eindhoven. I'm also a developer advocate. And my job here in the next 27 minutes is to give you, again, a little bit of CSS 101, tell you where things gone a little bit haywire, and tell you and share with you the newest things in CSS. Hopefully that you will go home and rethink how you write CSS from day to day. So first, let me point out the biggest problem with CSS. This thing. It's the basis, it's the cascade, it's the C in CSS. Why is it a problem? Because it's complex, it's different than other programming language paradigms. But this is one of the concepts, the fundaments of CSS, together with inheritance and specificity. Mark that word, that's 1 for specificity, 2. I'm going to say that word a lot today. Now, CSS is a language on which you can layer styling rules, and through inheritance, specific rules, like, for instance, font colors, can trickle down to other elements. And through the algorithms of Cascade specificity, conflicting rules will be resolved. Maybe there's a few key nines in the room here. I'm missing a few parts, but this is the Cascade that I learned to develop. But these days, the Cascade looks a little bit different. There's more things added to the Cascade. So let's recap. Let's do the 101 really quick. I'm going to read off my slides just for sake of time. And then when we know the basis, we can continue to the new stuff. So first up, origin and importance. Now, where are your the origin? Where are your styles authored? Are they authored in the browser, like in the browser style sheets, or has your user chosen a different font size in their browser settings? Has the user installed any extensions? That's the user, sorry, this slide. So the browser, then the user, has the user installed some extensions? Or have we, front-end developers or developers, authored custom stylings above those? Then our animation declarations, they have a little bit more priority in the Cascade. And then a pattern used throughout the entire Cascade is when we add that important, that exclamation part, important to our rule. Then the priority order is reversed. So first we have our important author styles, then our important extension styles, and then our important browser styles. So that means if an extension wants to override the styles that we have authored, for instance, I'm using the GitHub extension or refined GitHub extension in Chrome. That extension uses important user styles, so they will override the default styles that are authored by GitHub itself. And then we have transition declarations, which have the highest priority in the origin, just to make sure your transitions are running smooth. Then we have the element attached styles or inline styles. So in this case, we have an H1, and that should have a font size of 6 rem. Now, this might look the same as an atomic library, but the difference here is, in our first example, we are using the element attached styles. In our second example, we are using a selector to style our H1. And that brings us to the third part of the Cascade, the selector specificity. You all know this. This is where I think most of us struggle. We can select elements by IDs or via pseudo-elements. Pseudo-elements you can recognize with the double colon. The ones with the single colon, like empty, here is a pseudo-class. We have type selectors, tag selectors like the H1. We have class selectors component, data attribute selectors like data reset here, and universal selectors like the asterisk, where we can select everything, or sibling selectors like the plus sign. Now, the thing with selector specificity is this isn't the order of priority. With selector specificity, the priority is calculated by a tuple of weight categories. There are 3 weight categories. The first one is where we calculate the weight of the IDs, or calculate the number of IDs in the tuple. The second one is where we calculate the pseudo-classes, the classes, and attributes. Third one is where we calculate pseudo-elements and elements. And to give you an example how this works and why sometimes you might expect something else is by demoing it. And then I have to bring my browser to this. I have to do it like this. Oh, yeah. Okay, this works. Nice. So in this example, all right, shout out to Kilian Valkov, who creates Polypane. If you never heard of Polypane, it's this awesome development browser with it's a Swedish knife, pocket knife, for front-end developers with all these accessibility, cool stuff. Check it out. But he also created this CSS selector specificity tool, where you can visualize a selector specificity. So in this example, we have a header. We have within that header we need an H1. That H1 needs an ID site title, and the first direct descendant of that H1 site title needs to be have a class of logo. And the specificity score of this one is 112. 1 ID, 1 class, and 2 elements. If I were to remove this ID, the ID weight category loses its weight, and we could add some classes. Ooh. Like this. And then our second weight category becomes much bigger. Now, 042. If we go back to that first example, we see that we have that one here. So the priority of the specificity score goes from the IDs to the elements, and that means that this specificity score is higher than our previous one. So if we have a weight that is higher in the first category, it will always outperform the second weight category, even if that number is higher. Still following? See people nodding? Okay, that's good. Yes. We're doing a good job. Get away. Back to this one. All right, specificity. And then the last one, where even when specificity is of the same priority, then it comes down to the order of appearance. And with order of appearance, that means that the last declaration will have the highest priority. So in this case, the anchors will not have the color of aqua or chocolate. No, they will have the lovely color of peach puff. And there you have it, kids. The Cascade, or at least the one that I learned. Now, already it has become a little bit complex. And for newcomers in the front end, or perhaps people not familiar with CSS, it can be a bit confusing. They might get a bit anxious. And to try to have newcomers and people unfamiliar with CSS to be as productive as they can be, we thought very, very hard and came up with solutions like concepts like OOCSS, object-oriented CSS, or SMACs, which are ways into how to organize your CSS files, or ways how to define your CSS rules. Things like suit CSS or BEM, which are naming conventions, just to keep that specificity low and think about what you are writing in your CSS files. Build time scoping, like CSS modules, or concepts like emotion or styled components, where you have your CSS go through a build pipeline and eventually get scoped by enlarging the specificity. Or just forget naming things altogether and have things like Tailwind or CSS, atomic libraries, where you define your styling in your DOM. And the reason why all these solutions exist is because CSS couldn't keep up. But that's not the case anymore. The last 3 years, CSS have seen a significant revolution, perhaps I could say. And there have been things added to the CSS specification that will help us better to maintain and build within the Cascade. So let's look at some shiny new things. And while you are all looking at SpongeBob SquarePants in his underpants, I will take a sip of my water. Awkward. Right. Let me tell you about 2 new things in the Cascade. Few new things in the Cascade. So, with selector specificity, we have seen the introduction of the is and where pseudo class. What do they do? Well, you might have written these kinds of styles, where we have a button, and that button, when it's hovered or focus visible, or when it's active, and in all 3 cases it's disabled, it should have some styling. Now with is and where, we can take that list of selectors, hover, focus visible, and active, and put it within the is method. And we could do the same with the where pseudo class. Now, the key difference between is and where is that they have another way of working with specificity. So with the is pseudo class, the result of the specificity result will be that of the highest specificity within the list of selectors. In this case, it's the result will be specificity of 0, 1, 0 in the second way category. Let me point that out. So we have a score of 0, 2, 1. 0 because we have no IDs. 2 because we have one pseudo class here, and the result of is, which is also one pseudo class. And then the last one is from the button. Still following? Okay. With where, the result will always be 0. So whatever we put in here will always result in 0. So if we put an ID in there, it would result in 0. So in this case, we have a 0, 1, 1 because no IDs, 1 because we have one pseudo class. Let's forget about whatever within the where pseudo class and then the button. Okay. 2 new selectors that could help you write better CSS or have a better solution to your edge cases. Second thing I want to show you or talk about is Cascade Layers. Let's put this away. Okay. So about a year and a half ago, all major browsers introduced this new thing called Cascade Layers that sits higher in the cascade than selector specificity. Let's say we have this section and it has 3 classes upon it, and it asks itself, what color do I have? And if we look at the CSS, we see a class of tables, section, card, flex, all without special selectors. And because the classes have higher specificity scores than the section, because it's a type selector, and because flex is declared last, it means that the color of the HTML will end up being khaki. I should have used another color name. Now, let's introduce Cascade Layers. With Cascade Layers, we can, like it says, layer our stylings, our style rules. So in this example, I've layered each and every style rule. And this is the same specificity, same result. The color will be khaki because layers also will have priority based on the order of appearance. Now, what layers also have is the option to define their priority, to define their order. So in this case, I mean in our previous example, we'd have the priority of table, reset components, utility. That means that utility has the highest priority. Just like the order of appearance, the last declaration has the highest priority. But what we can do now is do silly things like reorder those cascade layers. So with this rule, I say, hey, our utility has the least priority and our components has the highest priority. And if I were to add that rule on top of my CSS, here, then our layers get reordered, and that means that our reset layer has the highest priority. And even so, because even so, there's a section which is a type selector which has less specificity than our card. Because reset is the highest, the cascade layer with the highest priority, it will have the color of cornflower blue. So cascade layers give us immense power in what priority our CSS, but also our external CSS files have. For instance, if you're loading a Bootstrap or if you're loading another third-party design system or library in your styles, you can add the layer to your imports, your import statement. And then if you first declare that priority, well, you have power on which layers, which styling rules have the highest priority. So what color do I have? Well, the one from the reset file layer. But unlayered styles, we could have unlayered styles. For instance, let's incrementally introduce Cascade layers into our code base, and we'd still end up with unlayered styles. Unlayered styles will always have the highest priorities, regardless of what layer priority you have defined yourself. And this is to maintain backwards compatibility. So Cascade layers. Encapsulation context. So the next step I want to talk about, two steps ago. Encapsulation context is relevant if you're working with web components. Anybody here already working with web components? Okay, a few. If I say web components, I automatically also say shadow DOM. So what is the shadow DOM? The shadow DOM is a separate DOM that lives separately from our normal DOM or our light DOM, but to the naked eye it is invisible. Now, the shadow DOM gives us the possibility, or the shadow DOM offers us encapsulation of styles. So every style that I declare within the shadow DOM will stay in the shadow DOM. For instance, with a few exceptions, for instance, I have this custom element that I have declared. I have to do this on this screen. I have this custom element declared. And within that custom element, I have stated that diffs should have the border of 10 pixels solid red. And indeed, inside the shadow DOM, it has a red border of 10 pixels. Outside of the shadow DOM, in our normal DOM, in our day-to-day CSS, I have declared that borders of diffs should be 5 pixels dotted blue, and it should be important. I've added this to state that I'm trying to override that red solid border, but no, because our styles are encapsulated within the web component, it will not go down into the shadow DOM. This element also has slots, so this is a way of putting light DOM into the shadow. No, that's not a great explanation. It's a way, if you know slots or children in React or Vue, this is the same thing. But remember that slots are also in the light DOM. So in this case, it would have the border of 5 pixel dotted blue. Now, encapsulation, almost. There are two selectors available which you can break encapsulation or cross shadow boundaries, as we say. The part, this screen, Maarten, the part select pseudo class and the slotted pseudo class. And with the part, we can target the shadow DOM from the light DOM. So in our light DOM, we say, hey, the part foo from our custom elements should have a deep pink border color. And yes, indeed, it does. And with slotted, we can target the first layer of our slots. So I say the first layer, the div in our slots should have a background color of aqua. And if I go down, this div will have the background color of aqua. So there are ways of breaking that encapsulation. Now, I say encapsulation and breaking encapsulation. This does not count for inheritance because you might have noticed that I've declared a color of forest green on my body. And because color is a style that is inheritable, it will trickle down to your shadow DOM. And this is mostly the case with typographic rules because you do not want to redeclare your font families and so on and so on. So, little recap. Encapsulation of Cascade and specificity. Inheritance just works. We have the part pseudo element we have to target shadow DOM from the light DOM, and we have the slotted pseudo element to target the first layer slotted elements within the shadow DOM. And then the last thing I want to share with you, and it's brand new in CSS, is the scope at rule. We can or in the near future, we can scope, just like we did with web components, we can scope our styles to a certain element. So in this case, I have a light scheme, and within the scope of the light scheme, all anchor tags should have the color of dark magenta. So my light scheme anchor tag has dark magenta color. I'm going to use my pencil here. And the one outside will not have a dark magenta color. Okay, cool. Sort of encapsulation. Now it even gets better because we can scope from a start to an end boundary with the add scope rule. So that means in this example we have the media object, and everything within the media object up until the first descendant of the content element, those images will have a border radius of 50%, and the content will have a padding of 1 EM. We now have a way of breaking the cascade, stopping styles from trickling down to other elements. So for instance, in this example, we have the media object, and the first image has a border radius, but the second one within the content element does not have a border radius because it's until, not until with, and the one outside of the scope does not have a border radius. Clear? Okay. And we can have local scoping. So if we have a style element and we can omit the scope root, and it will be automatically scoped to the first parent in the declaration. And then we can have cool things like nested scoping and so on and so on. But I have 3 minutes left and I have to continue my slides. So that's scoping. Well, with scoping, it's going to Chromium browsers this month. Yes, we're in October. It's in Chrome 1.18. Firefox and Safari said, all right, this looks cool. We're going to implement it as well. And hopefully it will be part of the interop community work group for next year. So there you have it. The Cascade, your worst enemy, or maybe your future best friend. There's immense value in our inheritance, specificity, and the Cascade work together. What makes CSS such a powerful language, and at the same time, what makes CSS so complex. Just like some of you might know what hoisting means in JavaScript or how a debounce function works, I think that if you want to evolve as a front-end developer or evolve your front-end skills, you need to know how Cascade, inheritance, and specificity work. But throughout the years, we have worked around the Cascade by using naming methodologies and other abstractions, and that's fine. We need something to get our job done. But that's not the case anymore, because we are living in the golden era for CSS and web UI, like Chrome developer advocates Una Kravitz told at CSS Day 2023. We have seen so many new features land in the browsers over the last 2 years. And everybody seems like they're starting work together. Spec writers, browser vendors are actually talking to each other and planning the landing features at the same time. Everybody working on the web is finally listening to us, the developers. And we now have the momentum to do away with the established ways of working and start anew. And we have an opportunity and a unique moment to rethink how we write and architecture CSS, preferably with fewer abstractions and fewer tooling. Understanding what's under the hood of your abstraction will make you transcend into a better developer. It will make you resilient for what the future of your craft will bring. Hypes come and go, standards are here to stay. And in the end, understanding things like the Cascade, inheritance, specificity, things that are under the hood, they will give you Thank you.